Oh, hello. Do you like it when the smart people do stupid things like I had a eyelash in my eyelid and I forgot to wash my hands before digging the eyelash out of my eyelid and gave me a puffy little infected eye. It's mostly better. Looks kind of horrible though. I always think it's funny when smart people do stupid things. Thankfully, I don't confuse intelligence with wisdom. Thankfully. I'm going to ask you a few questions in this video. It kind of seems like a broad video, but it's not. It's all completely connected. And it has to do with mind virus, you might say. It's a type of collective hysteria, and a lot of that's actually going on. A lot of this actually started, and I'll give you an example over here in a second. Back in the 1920s is when they started the Rockefeller peeps, I get to say Rockefeller peeps, started taking the term ether out of books, and this video is not anything about the ether, by the way. If you think it is, it's not, so I just wanted to make sure I pointed that out to you. They took a lot of stuff out, and that's when, of course, things that people took for their own remedies, I'm going to be very careful in the words I choose, move from natural to petroleum-based. Books became much, much worse. I mean, I have a massive library and things that I've collected for information over the decades and take quite pride, and I don't praise books themselves, rather the insights that they actually give me into a lot of things. As the old saying goes, by standing on the shoulders of giants, I've seen a lot further. But I've asked you this before, but it is getting worse. And I'm actually seeing it at the manager level now, where people, and it is really bad. I know people don't want to work anymore. It's like, why should I sacrifice my time? Because I only have two things in life, time and energy. And it's up to you how you spend it. And I don't appreciate it and I don't condone it, but I do get why, like, younger people or people in general, just like, I don't want to sacrifice my life, working to death when that won't help me actually pay for the cost of living. I do get that, but it's actually migrated up to the manager level where people, I'm only 51 years old. I'm not that old. I guess I'm older than a lot of these 20-something people that think they know something and they never do. Every generation of 20, 30-somethings think they know something, and it always turns out, if they actually grow in intellect and wisdom at all, that, oh, geez, I thought I knew stuff back then, but I really didn't know anything. Management level won't even do anything, lift a finger. It's like when management is as bad as the lowly bubblegum chewing, I don't have any hair to twirl, but I'm going to pretend to twirl hair here, right? It doesn't matter if it's a guy or a girl. I'm not, singling out men versus female hair. It's like, chewing gum and twirling your hair and counting the holes in the ceiling. I encountered that when I was younger, and so did you, but it's gotten to the point now where it has literally reached almost a crisis point where you can't get anything done. You remember back when we kind of laughed at people back in the 80s and 90s, like, wow, look at the pyramids. It had to have been aliens that did it. Human beings couldn't have done that, because people look at the pyramids and they're like, oh man, human beings could have never accomplished that. And just think where we are now. And I get why people would see that. Not that I've actually visited the pyramids, but I can see where humanity would see something so incredibly monumental. But now, instead of the pyramids as a marker stone, which it is a marker stone of its own accord, we've reached a point where we see, like, building a house or doing manual labor, like doing your own plumbing, or whipping out a hammer and a nail and a saw, even if it's an electrical saw. Like, wow, I don't know how people do that, man. I could never do that. It's gotten, and I'm not actually picking on the younger generation. I'm picking on everybody here. It's gotten really, really bad. And late at night, I'll actually scroll through Instagram looking for like little tidbits of news feeds, stuff that won't actually make the news. And I ran across something quite incredible. I shouldn't find it shocking at all. I'd like to talk about that in a second, but we're suffering on the brink of a type of collective insanity here, where people, not only people don't know how to do anything anymore, but you cannot, and I've been talking about this for years now, I have been, I have, you couldn't wave money at anyone or anything, not that I have money to wave, you can't get anything done. It doesn't matter what you got, it can't get done. It's like, money, I don't care about that stuff. It's like, aren't you the manager? I actually encountered that today, and it's happened to me many, many times. Now, I'm not living in Gooberville here. This is Lexington, Kentucky, which is a college town, and it is very much so white collar. And it's always isolated from bad economic results of things that are going on in the country. But it's gotten, I want to ask you if it's happening where you're at. It's like it's moved up the echelon of the chain of command from, like, you know, the bubblegum chewing hair twirler to management level. They've gotten as bad as the employees that they're supposed to be reprimanding for. So you can't get it done. Absolute laziness. You almost have to. There's things I want to say, but I'm not going to say it. You know, you have to, not literally, you know, not literally crack a whip, but I mean, you have to, like, bear down on somebody to get anything done. It's like, that's your job. You should be, like, jumping to do that, because there's a commission based in something that I was dealing with management on today. You can't get it done. Lying, lazy, lying, liar, liar, lazies. I want to know if this is going on to you. You've noticed it's actually moved up the food chain from, you know, the little peons on the floor to upper management. They're as bad. Don't tell me it's always been that way, because I have really good 360-degree forward and backwards in time vision on what I've experienced across the country. And this is an isolated place where it's like, if it's getting bad here, I know it is bad in bad places like Tampa, Miami, St. Pete, San Francisco, Detroit, on and on, Seattle, Portland, on and on. I mean, it has to be really, really bad there, and of course I'm hearing that it is. But it's happening here. This would be the last place for it to happen. It's kind of like the bellwether. It's like, when things go bad here, then you know it's like really bad everywhere else. That's basically what Lexington is, and I'm sure you're not familiar with Lexington at all, but I wanted to point that out, that that's what this place is. People are getting so brainwashed. It's really getting very bad out there. I'd like to hear your comment on that. By the way, I'd like to drop a big secret to you. I know you've never thought about this. I've talked about wisdom causing spiritual polarization. All these wise people that become spiritually polarized between their objective self, i.e. the psychophysical self, and their spiritual transcendent self. This is the reason why a fool or a common doofus, a goober, you know, like Gomer Pyle, golly, you know, someone has no internal struggle, because the distinction between transcendent self and immanent self is non-existent. They're all mixed together, like a cake batter mix. You know, you take a bunch of ingredients and you start mixing together, and you can't tell one ingredient from the other. In the case of a common fool, a goober, a Gomer Pyle, Shazam! I was entertaining people in the live stream with the Gomer Pyle impressions. I don't know if you remember who Gomer Pyle was. Very, very funny stuff. Actually, that's even before my time, but I still grew up watching it. It was just absolutely hilarious. There's a spiritual polarization. So wisdom causes spiritual polarization, but the opposite happens in society, or the zeitgeist. The ignorance of society and population in general causes collective polarization. So wisdom causes polarization, but it's the complete opposite in society. And any type of collective, whether that be a country or a region, so on and so forth, where you're involving, you know, groups of people, large groups of people, that ignorance actually causes polarization. And you're seeing it all over the globe. People with common sense and people with no common sense that have completely been brainwashed and taken into their consciousness the mind rot that is put out there on the Insta. I'm just going to call it the Insta. And the base in the book in the face. Use those words backwards. You know exactly where it's happening. People just listen, and it's called a bandwagon fallacy. Well, a lot of people believe in it. It must be true. That's a bandwagon fallacy. This is the reason why you should learn about fallacies. I love hearing bandwagon fallacy. My affairs. Well, 10 million people or 4 billion people can't be wrong. You just engage in a bandwagon fallacy of most people being generally ignorant is true. This gets back to my one of my statements that I've used for decades now. Nothing true is popular, and nothing popular is true. You can't use that sort of collectivist, well, a lot of people believe in it, must be true. It just gets completely ridiculous. Anyway, the opposite happens in society. Ignorance actually causes polarization. We're seeing it a whole lot now. I have a book here. This is many publications of this, and you can download a free copy. I'm not saying it's the best book in the world, but far from it. It's actually called Natural Philosophy by Deschanel. It's probably been reprinted like 20 times. This is the 1877 version. It is a big, heavy book. 1920s, before 1920s, before relativity and atomism started kicking into effect. Anytime there's rotten society, atomism and materialism always kicks in. It's the same thing that led to the split. I don't think the Roman Empire ever actually fell, but it actually split, and ultimately we could say it failed. But I have a quote in here on the Aether. There's a lot of quotes in here on the Aether. And books like this are not made anymore. After 1920s, you think, well, we've got advancements in technology, computer, all this great stuff, iPads, iPhones, all the rest of it. That's technology. That's not insight or collective understanding, a fundamental wisdom of the zeitgeist society that, you know, human beings would have a better appreciation if they had any sort of spiritual wisdom, i.e. insight to the nature of existence and being, to not be so bestial. And yet human beings have become more bestial. I mean, there's a lot of horrible things that absolutely happened in history. I mean, that's undeniable, but human beings have become a whole lot more debased. It seems necessary to assume, of course, the existence of a medium far more subtle than ordinary matter, a medium which pervades alike the most vacuous spaces and interior of all bodies. The interior of all bodies is no different than saying counter space, by the way. Whether solid, liquid, or gaseous, this medium is called the Aether. Yeah, on and on and on. You could actually read this. This is chapter 36, I believe. It's on the propagation of light and optics. But I've spent many years in college. Unfortunately, I have to say that, University of Kentucky and another college down in Florida. And books like this, doesn't matter how expensive or how advanced the class is, were not like this that gave you demonstrations that made you think. Books, like I said, this is 1877 publication on the natural philosophy by Deschanel. I can't say it's wonderful reading material, but it actually inspired the mind to think. I've had countless thousands of people email me about how happy they are that I recommended reading the Pitaphesian. I've told people over and over again, not only to homeschool, which is so important. I know a lot of parents don't have the ability to do that, but I'm going to say something that's 200% true, and I've said it over and over again, and people don't really listen. Some do. There's only a small collection of books that one would have to read to have a far, far, far superior understanding. It's not about collecting facts in your head, which is what high school and college does to you. Go home and memorize chapters 10 through 12, and we'll have a multiple guess test. It's about building a toolbox within your head so you can construct or destruct anything. That is what an actual education is. It's not indoctrination. You're supposed to empower people, not disempower people, which is what public school does. I know a lot of parents, once again, they don't have the time for that. They have to work their, bottoms right into the dirt just to make ends meet. It's like, I don't have time to teach my kids, but if there's any way you could find to do it. There needs to be collective schools that require very little money, where a child could get or a teenager could get an education that would make them a much wiser, more astute individual. And it doesn't require reading that many books. Back 150 years ago and on further, doesn't have to go back that far, it still exists out in the country today. These people that wrote some of the wisest things you could think of, they were really hard workers. I mean, they would actually literally bust their tails out chopping wood and doing things on a daily basis. It's like, well, how did these people write such intelligent things that people today with PhDs, when they read them, it literally splits their brain in two? Stuff like Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis, Theory of Natural Philosophy by Roger Boskevich, Nikola Tesla's favorite author, by the way. I dare people to download a free copy of that and try reading 2 or 3 pages. It's impossible. It will literally cleave your mind in two. People like that, they worked by candlelight or kerosene lantern, and they literally worked their tail into the dirt doing hard manual labor, yet they found time to compose stuff that's so profoundly intellectual that the best PhD on earth, they can't read it. It's like they're reading alien language. And the answer to the question that begs is, how did they do it? They did it by reading superior materials, not filling their head with a bunch of useless facts, which is what public school system. They should call it the Rockefeller school system. We actually have petroleum-based healing products, which do the opposite. and an indoctrination where they actually stopped making books like this. They became more and more and more neutered to the point that they just became watered down trash. I am extremely familiar with the stuff that's out there in the school system now, and also to the stuff, unfortunately, that I was given. I was far wiser to fall for the garbage in this. Like, I know this stuff is trash. The real stuff is hidden in the library that they never taught us in high school or college. I knew it was there. I extracted from that stuff. I knew all my teachers were fools, and they were fools. Even the better teachers were fools. Reading stuff like The Pitaphysian, Plotinus, Universal One by Walter Russell, Revolt Against the Modern World by Julius Evola, Metaphysics by Dr. Ananda Kichis Kumaraswamy, The Principal Upanishads, Meister Eckhart, Pseudo-Dionysius, Jakob Böhme. There is a far, far greater shortcut. You can literally chop off 85% of what people study in junior high, high school, and college. 85% of it could be lopped off and never studied, and only study 15% of the good stuff, and that 15%, none of which is taught in high school or college, unless you take a specialty course. None of that 15%. It's actually about 10%, not 15%. And you'd end up with a far, far sharper mind and a way better toolbox in your head than anybody in public school systems today. I don't say that lightly. I actually mean it literally. Anyway, I was scrolling through Instagram, and I just had to mention this about how polarized society's gotten. And once again, the polarization of society happens when there's mass delusions and ignorances. And of course our black mirror scrying devices like our iPhones and our iPads, because everybody now is scrying on a black mirror and they're getting brainwashed. There's this poor lady, I don't want to say her name. She's easily the definition of a real woman as ever there was. Don't worry, women, I'm not picking on you or any other woman. The easiest definition of a real woman. She like gives hair care tips, she has this long hair, and she lives in Alaska, and she's got I forget, 2 or 3 kids, something like that. She lives in the outback of Alaska. She like makes her own clothing, she makes her own soap, chops her own wood. She does everything, and she shows how she dresses. Like, this is how I normally dress when I go do chores, and you know, just super hard work. You can actually count the lines in her forehead to know that she's constantly stressed out from doing hard manual labor. You know, a true, honest, living person. I'm not trying to overpraise her, but in a couple of her Instagrams, she's strapping on, I'm going to call it a heater. You know, pew, 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 she's strapping on a heater. Yeah, you know, right here, right? Some tactical Tupperware, I'll call it, yeah? She's in Alaska. Of course, she has a Second Amendment right she has to do that anywhere in the United States, not just because she's in Alaska. She made another video saying, I'm sorry there's all these haters out there, but you don't get it. All the Europeans that think they're so smart. By the way, I want to ask you a question. You think, what is different now in Alaska, if you're living in the outback, than there was 100 years ago, 200 years ago? Not that people really lived up there other than some Native Americans, some native people. We take whatever pick you want on the term. What's different now than it was 100 years ago? The answer is nothing. There's so many Europeans. I kept scrolling through the comments. You know, I didn't think I could have a lower opinion. I hate opinions, by the way. A lower opinion of society in general than the ignorance I was reading. There's this poor, hardworking woman. She is in a place in Alaska where there's super gigantic grizzly bears. But it doesn't matter if it was like right here in Lexington, Kentucky. She has that right, you know, here in the United States anyway. Everybody was picking on this poor woman. When she goes outside to do her chores, you know, milk the goats or milk the cows and chop the wood and do all this stuff, bake her bread, she literally does everything like a pioneer woman. They're picking on this poor woman for packing a blaster. It's like, are Europeans so clueless to have no idea that Alaska is full of like some hideously large, dangerous creatures that will gobble you up? People literally are, and I've said this many, many times, are living in a nutshell, sniffing their own flatulence. They're completely clueless. Europeans love to think, and I'm not picking on Europeans, even if you think I am, think they're so intellectually superior to Americans. Picking on this poor lady that like works her tail off, like a true pioneer woman, you know, to provide and feed and clothe, you know, herself and her family. Yeah, she's living in the backwoods of Alaska. There's grizzly bears. All these people think, oh, how do you dare? Oh, you crazy Americans, look at it. You know, you're walking around with a blaster on your hip. Excuse me. Yeah, she's in Alaska. Europeans think they're so smart, and I got to tell you, collectively, I can't agree to that one. I read so many comments. People say, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm a European." They were saying like, "Oh, you're endangering your children." No, she's actually protecting her children. This type of societal polarization, people have been consuming the Insta feeds. I can read it. If you actually have a mind like a steel trap, you can consume it too, but not let the ignorance, seep into your brain and affect you. But for lesser minds, it's kind of like confronting evil. You got two people confront evil. You got someone with strong wisdom and strong understanding and a sharp mind. Evil's not going to affect that person, but the same thing done to a weaker soul, a weak-willed person, will greatly affect them. You have to have a will and a spirit and a soul like a steel trap. It only lets in things that are good and keeps out the evil. Like, that's evil, I'm not going to let it in. The dumb person's like, I don't know if that's evil or not. I want to test it a little bit, give it a trial run, see if it's evil or not. It's like, no, you don't do that, but that's what weak-willed people do. People really are living in a nutshell. The polarization gets worse and worse and worse. And people, and I'd like to hear from you on this, if you notice management is getting worse and worse and worse. People are getting more brainwashed. It's actually getting bad out there. It's like a collective insanity, and it is palpable. You can almost slice it with a butter knife. You can almost see it. Like, I know I can't see it, but I can just about see it. The palpable collective insanity, the societal polarization. I don't care about societies or politics. I shouldn't. I care about wisdom and understanding. Creating beautiful things, understanding the nature of beauty, seeing the fundamental substrate of all existence and cosmic mechanics. That's what I'm about. I'm not interested in changing, because everything goes in cycles. It will reach such an extreme point, and this is what the Indians call the Kali Yuga, where it will snap back, but how long it takes to snap back, or it could actually go so low that the rubber band breaks. And when the rubber band breaks, that means there's this deep lull period where you're basically talking about the Dark Ages, where the rubber band is slowly being reassembled, but it's broken for, several lifetimes. The Dark Ages. Turns out the Dark Ages were actually dark. There's a lot of evidence for that, demonstrable evidence from tree rings and whatnot, that they were actually dark ages, and it could have been from a supervolcano, but that's a matter for another discussion. You can only herd the masses with the herd mentality, and I actually see this, being impinged on the society in general, and it's working so great because everybody is so fascinated with their Black Mirror devices. I got two in front of me right now, the iPad and this stupid thing and my iPhone, and I just want to say that I'm very prepared and I can see what's coming. I don't know if you are or not. I'd like to hear what you think on this. By the way, there's over 4,000, as the year's closing out, there's over 4,000, way over 4,000, it's probably over 10,000, major retails that are closed across this country because nobody wants to stop the thieves. Not only is everybody brainwashed and operating on collective insanity, and sniffing their own sniffing their own vapors. That should make a great bumper sticker. Stop sniffing your own vapors. But nobody has a spine. They don't want to stop the thieves. All of this is working exactly as planned. If you think that's some sort of crazy tinfoil hat idea that I have, no. No, I don't operate off of emotions and illogic and irrationality. I can see that this is all working towards a cumulative point, and it is working perfectly. And once there's critical mass for it, people like me and countless tens of thousands of others like me, you can't stop it. It's kind of like you could have a bunch of like Schwarzenegger in his prime, which I'm not, yeah. 10,000 Schwarzeneggers in his prime, like from the days of Conan the Barbarian. You got 10,000 of them, you got an onslaught of million head of longhorn cattle. They ain't going to stop it. This is what we call critical mass, as a kind of a crude analogy. But I've seen it move up the echelon now where you can't get management to do, it's like, I expect that out of the peon employees. They're not paid as much as you or making like 5 or 10 times as much as him. But I'm seeing it out of management, just this. Once it reaches there, it's almost like a thermometer. You see the thermometer going up and you start sweating when it reaches a certain temperature. None of us really cared too much when it was at the peon level of your zit-faced store clerk worker or somebody that's like, you know, fresh out of college. They think they know everything and they don't know anything. It's like, well, at least I got management to go to and they'll fix it. Well, this mental defect has reached management. I've seen it many places, and I'd like to know if that has happened where you're at also. But there is good news. I mean, you can change your mind, and there is a shortcut, not only for you, but for your little offspring. And if I told you, and it was true, and I assure you on all my life and my soul that it is 100% true, that you can cut out 85 to 90% of the garbage that you're, there are some shortcuts in life. Cut out 85 to 90% of the garbage that you're forced to regurgitate. Go home and digest this. We'll have a multiple guest test on it. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help it. That's the Rockefeller system. Excuse me. That was so-called education. It's not. I'll edit that cough out of this video. I'll also, too, edit out, you know, this red spot on my eye where I stupidly picked out an eyelash with my dirty face. Like, wash your hands first. It was hurting really bad, and I didn't think, yeah, I love it once again. Smart people do stupid things. But there is a shortcut. I've had thousands of people email me telling me, wow, I read the Epiphysian twice. You know, I didn't think it was like the most awesome stuff to read. You know, it wasn't like reading, you know, some sort of romance or thriller novel. But my brain has been reorganized in a superior fashion. I can see through things. I can see clearly. I can dissect nonsense, and I can engage the dialectic, which I could not do before, and I have a 4-year college degree. They got more out of just reading that one book, and that's just one, and thinking about, not just reading it, you know, flapping their lips in their head. Excuse me, dry cough. But actually, you know, reading a sentence, thinking about it a second, reading a sentence, thinking about it a second, it will reorganize your brain. These people that wrote the great stuff from the Dark Ages on up until right about the late 1600s. These people had a secret shortcut because these people also too chopped wood, and most of them did, enormous amounts of manual labor. Like, where do they find time to come up with stuff so genius that it cracks my skull apart to read it? And I assure you, you go download the Epiphysian, way worse than the Epiphysian as far as cracking your skull, is either the Divina Proporzione or the Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis, Theory of Natural Philosophy by Boscovich. You can't get through 2 pages. You'll feel like you got a headache. There is a shortcut. Wouldn't you like to spend more time and cut out 90% of the poppycock that you're never, ever, ever going to use in life? I know I did. It certainly helped me. Even the people that hate me know I have a sharp mind. I hate that guy. He's fat, bald, and tattooed and ugly, and I don't like his personality, but he is smart. I take his recommendations. There is a shortcut. I don't think I'm anybody special, but I had the wherewithal to know that my teachers were fools and to read the right stuff. Not just read it. Reading alone isn't it. You know, read a sentence, think about it a second. Another sentence, think about it. You're supposed to have a toolbox in your head, not fill your head full of useless existential facts, because that doesn't really help anybody unless you're a bean counter. Thanks so much for watching. Happy New Year!